Hey y'all, I'm coming to you from sunny Ontario, sometime between the 7th wave and Stephen Lecce challenging public health directors to a cage match. What better time to turn away from our spectacle of a province to focus on an issue in Quebec? Today I will discuss Quebec, and even worse than that, just kidding, love the Habs, is that I'm here to discuss Quebec's government, specifically Bill 21. What a controversy. There are elements of federalism, minority rights, majority rule, and all sorts of uniquely Canadian issues surrounding Bill 21. There is a ton to unpack here, so in this small segment I'll be focusing on my position around this bill. That it is fundamentally wrong based on the moral and legal principles and values in multicultural democracy, and that it should be allowed to happen based on the concepts and ideals of federalism. What a paradox this is. First, let's approach why I believe that this is fundamentally wrong and immoral in our Canadian context. First of all, this is obviously a targeted piece of legislation. Quebec is absolutely valid in their pursuit of cultural separation and secularism, as this has been their tradition for decades. However, this legislation is obviously targeting Islam and Muslims who live in the province, as the legislation specifically mentions head coverings and other garments like the niqab. In her readings, Gaay specifically says that true equality cannot tolerate legislative distinctions that treat certain people as second-class citizens. One could argue that this legislation also applies to Catholics, but when faced with a comparison between a perhaps smaller percentage of Christians who wear easily concealable crucifixes to the many Muslim women who wear the hijab or niqab daily, it is quite easy to see what the plan is here. Aside from its targeted nature, I also oppose the bill because it goes against my fundamental belief, backed by Kymlicka's readings, that the government on all levels should make every effort to adapt to reflect the identities and practices of immigrant groups, and all public spheres should follow this lead and create a safe space for different peoples to express themselves and their beliefs, as long as they are not causing physical or emotional harm to others. These are all part of the challenges that Koukathas talks about in terms of living in a multicultural democracy, especially in terms of ideological differences. The ideology of Quebec, or at the very least the stated ideology of Quebec's government and ruling class, is thoroughly incompatible, even against, the existence of minority groups who encroach on the way of life and secularism of the province. Now to talk about the paradoxical bit. How can this be morally incorrect and yet be allowed to continue? It all has to do with the model of federalism. I believe that Canada or other provinces should not interfere with Quebec for the same reasons I believe that countries should not impose their will upon others, way back to the Treaty of Westphalia. Although using Section 33, which was elaborated on in one of Professor Marder's lectures near the beginning of the course, as a way to circumnavigate the federal government, Quebec is totally within their provincial rights to regulate public, as in government-run, and sponsored, spaces. If this bill applied outside of the public sphere, it would not be so controversial, and would likely be considered a deeply authoritarian and overreaching piece of legislation. Using the logic laid out in Nations Without States, I believe that the federalism system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is serving a national minority, that being the Quebecois, and preserving their way of life and values that are distinct from the rest of Canada. That is the paradoxical nature of this issue, is that Quebec is within their right to protect their own national minority, but it is coming at the expense of the rights of other minority groups. It really is quite the confusing issue. To make it even more confusing, this may not even be representative of the ideals and needs of the national minority, or, in this case, the majority of Quebecers in province. Very similar to the ideas presented by Fortman, this majority could be a constructed one, rather than primordial, in order to better support the needs of the ruling party. This is absolutely possible, given that Legault and his movement are the ones responsible for pushing for this government in the name of the majority of Quebecers that they supposedly represent. In conclusion, I personally believe that Bill 21 is at odds with moral and legal values of Canada as a country. However, due to the federalism model that we follow, the federal government needs to respect Quebec's sovereignty on this issue. Thank you for listening.